Why is my face missing from this? The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was late November, the night before Thanksgiving, and the living room smelled of cinnamon candles and roasted pecans. My mother, Linda, glanced up from her seat by the fireplace, her smile stiff as she smoothed the hem of her ivory sweater. I was standing in front of the mantel, staring at the giant family portrait in the new silver frame. The one everyone had been gushing about all evening. My father, Richard, cleared his throat as if rehearsing some excuse. But there was no denying it. In the spot where I had stood last summer, shoulder to shoulder with my brothers, there was just empty space. Cropped out. I felt my pulse flutter in my throat. For a moment, no one spoke. The laughter that had been echoing around the room dissolved into brittle silence. My name is Evan Mitchell, and I suppose if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said that family was the one thing I could always count on. I'm 34, the middle child between my older brother, Aaron, and my younger sister, Emily. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I was the quiet one, the one who blended into the background while everyone else demanded attention. Even as a kid, I learned that keeping the peace often meant swallowing my own feelings. My father, Richard, worked as a civil engineer, a man of structure and precision. He believed in order and discipline. My mother, Linda, stayed home, orchestrating everything behind the scenes: the family vacations, the birthday parties, the perfectly coordinated Christmas cards. It was in this house that I learned to measure love in tiny, almost invisible gestures. A lunch packed without asking. A pat on the back when I won second place in the science fair. A smile over the dinner table when I got accepted to the University of Georgia. But it was also in this house that I learned how easily affection could be withheld. My brothers and sisters never had to earn their place in the photo frame. Aaron was the golden boy, the high school quarterback who got a full scholarship to Clemson. Emily was the baby, the unexpected blessing, the one whose ballet recitals were attended by the entire neighborhood. And me? I was the one they sometimes forgot to mention in holiday letters. After college, I moved back home for a while to help my parents when my grandmother fell ill. I took a job as a history teacher at the local middle school, telling myself it was only temporary. But months became years, and somehow I became part of the background, dependable Evan, always around when someone needed a hand, but never quite the center of anyone's attention. I remember the summer the photo was taken. It was July, hot enough that the air shimmered on the sidewalks. Linda had insisted we all wear matching blue shirts. I'd come straight from school, summer programs for the kids who needed extra help, and I was still carrying my leather messenger bag when I walked into the studio. "Do you want to set that down?" the photographer asked politely. "No," I said, pressing the strap tighter against my shoulder. "I won't be long." Everyone else was already there: my parents, Aaron with his wife Jessica, Emily clutching her fiancé's hand. They were laughing about something when I walked in. I waited for someone to notice me, but no one did. When the photographer finally gestured for me to step into place, it was almost as though I had interrupted something private. The smile on my father's face wavered. My mother tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I squeezed in between Aaron and Emily, trying to ignore the feeling that I was a placeholder, a stand-in. That night, after everyone left, I helped my mother clean the kitchen. The counters were cluttered with paper plates and half-empty bottles of sweet tea. As I wiped down the table, she sat with her hands folded, her expression tired. "You know," she said, "you could smile more in pictures. It wouldn't kill you to look happy." I didn't have the heart to tell her that I had smiled, just not the way she wanted. Sometimes I think that was the moment I started to slip out of the frame. I've always believed in working for what you have. After all, nobody handed me the job I loved. I built my classroom from scratch, using my own money to buy maps and art supplies, staying late to help the kids who were too shy to ask questions. There was this one student, Malik, who struggled with reading. He would come in before school started, nervously clutching a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. I spent months sitting with him, sounding out every word, celebrating every sentence. When he finally read an entire paragraph without stopping, he looked up at me, eyes shining. "You don't give up on people, do you, Mr. Mitchell?" I didn't answer right away. "No," I finally said. I guess I don't. That was the truth. I never gave up on anyone. Not my students. Not my family. Even when they seemed determined to erase me. When my grandmother passed away, I was the one who packed up her house. The others were too busy. Emily with her wedding plans, Aaron with his real estate business. I spent weeks sorting through decades of memories, carefully labeling boxes: kitchen, bedroom, donate, keep. In her bedroom closet, I found a shoebox tied with a blue ribbon. Inside were photographs, brittle and yellowed with age. My mother as a little girl, my father in high school, and near the bottom, a picture of me at age 5, sitting on Grandma's lap. On the back, she'd written in looping cursive, "My Evan, the heart of this family." I pressed the photo against my chest, blinking away the sudden sting of tears. I left the house late that night, the shoebox on the passenger seat. I thought about that picture every time I felt invisible, every time I wondered if I mattered to anyone. I suppose it was easier for everyone to pretend that I was just there, a fixture in the background, the one who wouldn't complain or cause trouble. But the night I saw my face missing from that new family portrait, something cracked open in me. I kept hearing my grandmother's voice in my head. Don't let them decide your worth. That memory wrapped around me like armor. My father's voice pulled me back to the living room. "Evan," he began, in the careful tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, "we just thought the picture looked better balanced this way." Balanced. Like my presence had been a weight tipping the scales. I stared at them, all of them, and realized I had spent my entire life trying to fit into a frame that was never built for me. And in that moment, I knew I was done. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the blue shoebox balanced on my chest like a question I couldn't answer. Balanced. The word felt like a bruise every time I thought of it. Around dawn, I got up and made coffee in the quiet kitchen. The clock over the sink ticked in the darkness, marking off the seconds I could never get back. I watched the steam rise from my mug and thought about all the times I'd accepted less than I deserved. All the moments I'd swallowed my pride because I was afraid of making waves. But I wasn't afraid anymore. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit where I kept the last boxes from my grandmother's house. The building was a squat block of cinder and corrugated steel, nothing fancy, but it held pieces of my history nobody else had bothered to claim. Unit 42. I unlocked the roll-up door and stepped into the dim interior. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the hallway. I found the envelope exactly where I'd left it, tucked into a manila folder marked legal documents. For years, I'd almost forgotten it existed. I remembered the day my grandmother had pressed it into my hands. I was 25 and reeling from the failure of my first attempt to move out of Charleston. The apartment lease had fallen through, my car had broken down, and I'd come back to her house feeling like a disappointment. She'd looked me straight in the eye and said, "One day, you'll understand that having a place in this family doesn't mean you have to disappear." Then she handed me the envelope. "Keep this safe," she'd whispered. I'd assumed it was some sentimental letter or maybe instructions about her funeral. I'd slipped it into a folder and never opened it again. Until now. I sat on the concrete floor, the folder spread across my knees. My hands were shaking as I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside was a notarized statement dated the summer I'd turned 20. The first page was typed in neat, formal language. I read it twice, the words not quite connecting. My grandmother had owned the house my parents were living in. Not only owned it, but left it to me. It was all there in black and white. The deed, the trust documentation, the stipulation that my parents could live there rent-free as long as they maintained the property. But the ownership, every legal right to that house was mine. I exhaled a shuddering breath. All this time, I'd believed I was the one without power. The one standing on the outside, looking in. But I had been holding the frame the whole time. By evening, the shock had settled into something colder. Something solid. I didn't tell anyone right away. Instead, I called my attorney friend, Daniel, and asked him to meet me at his office after hours. Daniel had been my roommate in college, one of the few people who'd never treated me like I was invisible. When I showed him the envelope, he raised his eyebrows. "Evan, do you realize what this means?" I nodded. It means I get to decide who belongs. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "Then let's make sure you do this right." The next day, I went back to the house. Everyone was still in town for Thanksgiving, and the kitchen was full of voices and clinking dishes. I paused in the doorway, the envelope tucked under my arm. My mother was arranging a platter of deviled eggs. My father was pouring sweet tea into tall glasses. When they looked up and saw me, I felt the weight of every silent year pressing down on my shoulders. But I didn't falter. I walked to the dining table and laid the envelope in the center. "You should look at this," I said quietly. My father frowned. "What is it?" "The truth," I said. The party decided to leave out of the picture. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then my mother reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. They read the deed together, their faces draining of color. Emily stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "Evan, what is this?" "It's the reason I don't have to stand here pretending to be grateful for a place you all decided I didn't belong in." Aaron opened his mouth, closed it again. My father finally spoke, his voice brittle. "You're making a mistake. This isn't necessary." I met his gaze and felt something uncoil inside me. "It is," I said, "because you made sure I knew exactly where I stood. Now it's my turn to decide where you stand." For the first time in my life, I watched my father look away. I'd expected to feel triumphant, but instead, I felt a strange, weary relief. I had proof that I mattered, that my presence wasn't optional, that I was never really invisible. Aaron stepped forward, palms raised. "Evan, let's be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I interrupted. My voice was low but steady. "More reasonable than any of you have ever been with me." Emily swallowed, her voice small. "You're going to kick them out?" I looked at her, at the faces I'd known my entire life, and felt the enormity of the moment settle into my bones. "I haven't decided yet," I said truthfully. "But from now on, you don't get to decide who belongs in this family." There was a long, painful silence. Then my mother sank into a chair, her shoulders curling inward. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I remembered the blank space in that photograph and knew pity wasn't the same as forgiveness. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I left the envelope on the table and walked out into the crisp November air. I didn't look back. The next morning, Daniel called to confirm that the deed was valid and enforceable. He asked if I wanted to start the process of formally transferring the title on record. "Not yet," I said. "I want them to sit with this for a while." I needed them to understand that erasing me came with consequences. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 voicemails from my mother, 3 from Emily, and 1 from my father, though his was just a clipped sentence. "We need to talk." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to rush over and smooth everything out. I went back to my classroom the following Monday. My students were working on a unit about family history. As I watched them trace the branches of their ancestry, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. Or grief for the family I'd spent decades trying to belong to. But beneath that ache was something sturdier. Pride. Because I had finally claimed the truth my grandmother had left me. 3 days later, I agreed to meet my parents. We sat in Daniel's conference room, a sterile space with beige walls and a single painting of a marsh at sunrise. The quiet tick of the clock felt like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Linda looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, making her face look pinched. My father sat stiffly beside her, his arms folded across his chest. "Thank you for coming," my mother began, her voice wobbling. I didn't answer right away. I wanted them to feel the discomfort they'd never minded inflicting on me. Finally, I said, "Let's get to the point." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you've asked to discuss the property deed and any potential arrangements going forward." My father leaned forward, his jaw tense. "Evan, this is absurd. You know we've always treated you fairly. This piece of paper doesn't change that." I watched him struggle to maintain the calm veneer he always wrapped himself in. For years, I'd believed him. believed that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, I'd earn a place in their affections. But sitting across from him now, I saw it for what it was: entitlement. "It changes everything," I said evenly. My mother pressed her palms flat on the table. "We never meant to hurt you. The picture was just, we thought it looked more balanced. You've always been sensitive about these things." There it was, gaslighting in the most familiar form. I looked at her, steady. "You edited me out of your life, Mom. And you can't pretend it didn't happen just because it's inconvenient now." Her lip trembled. "It was just a photo." "No," I said. "It was a declaration. You made it clear I was never really part of the family you wanted to show the world." Aaron arrived late, his tie askew, looking as if he'd been dragged out of a meeting he didn't care about. He walked in and took one look at the envelope on the table before sighing dramatically. "Is this really necessary?" he asked, dropping into a chair. I met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." "Come on, Evan. You're going to throw away decades of family over a picture?" I felt my hands clench in my lap. "It's not about the picture. It's about everything that picture represents." He rolled his eyes. "You're being difficult." Daniel lifted a brow. "Mr. Mitchell, let's remain respectful." Emily wasn't there. Later, I'd learned she'd texted my mother to say she didn't want to be involved, that this was between Evan and his issues. That, more than anything, sealed my resolve. My father straightened, his voice hardening. "What do you want from us?" It wasn't a question born of curiosity. It was an accusation. "I want you to understand," I said, my throat tight, "that you don't get to define my worth anymore. I have the legal right to this house. I'm not kicking you out yet, but there will be new terms." My mother swallowed. "Terms?" "Yes. You'll start paying market rent. And you'll acknowledge that I'm not expendable." Aaron let out a soft laugh. "This is about money? Seriously?" I turned to him, my voice low. "This is about respect. Something you've never had for me." The conversation spiraled after that. My father accused me of using Grandma's generosity to punish them. My mother wept silently, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she refused to meet my gaze over. Aaron lectured me about family loyalty while never once apologizing for all the times he'd treated me like a burden. At one point, my father leaned in, his face inches from mine. "You think this makes you powerful?" he hissed. "You're just proving you're as petty as we always knew you were." For a moment, the old reflex to shrink back rose in me. But I didn't move. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye. "No," I said softly. "I'm proving that I was here all along, whether you wanted to see me or not." Daniel tapped a pen against his notes. "We'll prepare a revised lease agreement. You'll have 30 days to decide if you want to remain in the home under the new terms." Linda's shoulders shook as she pressed the tissue to her mouth. My father didn't look at me again. When the meeting ended, Aaron lingered at the door. "You could have handled this differently," he said. I studied him. "You're right. I could have continued pretending everything was fine. But I'm done doing that." He shook his head and walked away without another word. Outside, I leaned against my car, the autumn wind ruffling my hair. For the first time in my life, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Freedom, maybe. Or the quiet thrill of finally standing my ground. That night, Emily called. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice brittle. "Because I'm tired of being erased," I replied. She sighed. "You know Mom's not strong. This is breaking her heart." "I know," I said. But she didn't think twice about breaking mine. The days that followed were tense. My mother tried to call every morning. My father didn't reach out at all. Aaron sent one terse text. "You'll regret this." But I didn't. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Jessica, Aaron's wife, showed up at my door. She looked nervous, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. "I know I don't have the right," she began, "but I wanted you to know not everyone agrees with how they treated you." I studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because..." She hesitated. "Because I've watched them ignore you for years. And I've watched you keep showing up anyway. I don't think I could have done that." I felt my throat tighten. Thank you. She looked down, twisting her wedding band. I'm sorry. For all of it. It was the first apology I'd heard from anyone. And in that moment, I realized not everyone was beyond redemption. That evening, I sat in my living room with the shoebox on my lap. I pulled out the photograph of Grandma and me and traced her handwriting on the back. My Evan, the heart of this family. I believed her now in a way I never had before. December came with brittle gray skies and the hush that falls over Charleston just before Christmas. The house was quiet, the old floorboards groaning under my footsteps. I had given my parents the 30 days Daniel outlined to decide if they would stay under the new terms. I hadn't heard a word from them in a week. Part of me still hoped they would call, not to argue, but to say they understood.
To say they were sorry.
But hope had always been my most dangerous habit. On the morning of the deadline, I drove to the house. It looked the same as it always had. White siding, green shutters, the big magnolia tree reaching over the roof like a protective hand. I stood on the front porch for a moment, the keys heavy in my pocket. I thought about all the nights I'd walked up these steps, too tired or too heartsick to realize I deserved better. When I knocked, there was no answer. Inside, the furniture was still in place, but a few cardboard boxes lined the hallway. My mother's china figurines were wrapped in newspaper. My father's golf trophies were gone from the mantel. They had chosen to leave rather than stay under my conditions. And for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Later that day, Daniel called. They signed the termination agreement, he said. The house is officially yours with no encumbrances. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle.
Thank you, I said.
You did the hard part yourself, he replied. I spent the next week cleaning. I scrubbed baseboards, washed windows, aired out every room. It felt like washing away decades of unspoken tension. On the last day, I climbed into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The air smelled of cedar and old dust. In a corner, under a yellowed tarp, I found the original family portrait, the one with me still in it. I carried it downstairs and set it on the dining table. I stared at the photo for a long time. And then I did the hardest thing of all. I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to let their blindness define the rest of my life. Christmas Eve came, quiet and bright with frost. I didn't expect anyone to visit. But around noon, Jessica knocked on my door. She stood in the doorway holding a small wrapped box. I know you probably don't want company, she said, but I thought you should have this. Inside was a picture frame, plain, unadorned wood. When Aaron and I got married, she explained, your grandmother gave me this frame. She said it was for any picture that reminded me where I came from. I thought, maybe you should decide what belongs in it now. I swallowed, emotion rising too fast to catch. Thank you. I managed. She reached out and squeezed my hand. You deserve better than what they gave you. After she left, I carried the frame to the dining room. I set it next to the old portrait, my younger self looking out with that tentative smile. I knew exactly what photo belonged there now. Not the edited family portrait. Not the one where I'd been cropped out. But the picture of me sitting on Grandma's lap, her arm wrapped around my shoulders, both of us smiling without reservation. That night, I called Emily. She sounded cautious. Evan. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and it was true. But I'm also not pretending this didn't happen. She let out a shaky sigh. I wish I'd stood up for you. I didn't know how. Then learn, I said gently, because I'm done teaching people how to treat me. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a start. In January, I decided to put the house to better use. I signed the paperwork to convert the front rooms into a learning center for kids who needed extra tutoring. I used my own savings to buy bookshelves, beanbag chairs, art supplies. On opening day, Malik and his mother came to see the place. His eyes went wide as he took it all in. You did this? He asked. Yeah, I said softly. I did. He grinned. It's cool. It was more than cool. It was proof that I could build something lasting from everything I'd survived. A month later, I got a letter from my mother. She wrote that they were settling in with Aaron and Jessica for a while. She hoped I was well. At the bottom, in a shaky hand, she'd scrawled, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you will." I folded the letter and put it in the shoebox with the rest of my keepsakes. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I owed her on demand. It was something I would choose if, and when I was ready. Spring came slowly, green creeping back into the magnolia branches. One Saturday morning, I stood in the living room, sunlight spilling across the floor. I looked around and felt something shift inside me. For the first time, the house felt like it was really mine. Not because of a deed or a document, but because I had chosen to stay. A week later, I hosted the first community dinner. Parents and kids from the neighborhood came to eat and talk. We set up folding tables and shared homemade casseroles. As I watched everyone laughing, I realized that belonging was never about a photograph. It was about the people you welcomed into your life, the spaces you made for others. Near the end of the night, Jessica slipped me a folded note. "Thank you for proving there's another way to be family." I tucked it into my pocket and smiled. In that moment, I understood the truth my grandmother had always known. You don't have to wait for permission to take your place in the world. You just have to claim it. 6 months later, the house didn't look the same. The first thing people noticed was the front porch. I'd replaced the sagging railings with smooth white columns. Fresh planters brimmed with lavender and creeping jasmine, and the old porch swing was scrubbed clean and painted sky blue. Every time I walked up the steps, I felt like I was arriving somewhere I belonged. Inside, the walls were bright and new. I'd painted the dining room a warm honey color, replacing the heavy drapes with simple linen panels that let the light pour in. Most of the old furniture was gone, donated or sold. In its place were sturdy tables and shelves stocked with books, art supplies, and bins of puzzles. I called it the Mitchell Learning Center. The first time I unlocked the door and let in the Saturday morning tutoring group, I thought about Grandma. I imagined her standing in the doorway, nodding her approval. "You built something, Evan," she would have said. "Something that matters." And she would have been right. By early summer, the Learning Center was thriving. Parents signed up for waiting lists. Volunteers from the university offered to mentor kids in math and reading. One afternoon, as I helped Malik organize a bookshelf, he turned to me with a grin. "My mom says you must be rich now, owning this whole place." I laughed. "Not rich in money." He looked puzzled. "Then why do you do all this?" I thought for a moment. "Because nobody should feel like they don't matter," I said. "And because I spent too long trying to fit into a picture that wasn't meant for me. Now I get to make a new one." He seemed to consider that, then nodded solemnly.
"Cool," he said.
In late July, I got a letter from Emily. It was longer than the first, written in her tidy cursive. "I've been thinking about everything," she wrote. "I wish I could say I didn't know what was happening. But the truth is I did. I just didn't have the courage to stand up to them. I hope one day we can talk about it. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I set it on the mantel, next to the photograph of Grandma and me. I wasn't ready to reply yet. But I wasn't angry anymore. In August, Jessica stopped by with her daughter, a shy little girl named Chloe. Chloe clung to her mother's hand as they stepped inside. "Do you remember Miss Jessica?" I asked gently. Chloe nodded, eyes wide. "This is your place?" she whispered. "It's everyone's place," I told her. They stayed for an hour, helping to set up supplies for the new school year. When they left, Jessica hugged me. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever said those words out loud. I held on to them like a gift. One evening in early September, I sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in ribbons of gold and coral. I thought about everything that had happened, the hurt, the confrontations, the slow, unexpected healing. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. That night, I pulled out the plain wooden frame Jessica had given me. I slipped Grandma's photo inside, centering it carefully. On the back, I wrote, "The beginning of everything." A week later, I hosted a community dinner in the backyard. Long tables were set with mason jars of wildflowers and platters of homemade food. Neighbors, students, volunteers, All the people who had become my chosen family filled the space with laughter and stories. Near the end of the evening, Malik stood on a chair and tapped his spoon against a glass. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice cracking just a little, "we got you something." He held out a wrapped package. Inside was a new sign for the porch. "Welcome home." I couldn't speak for a moment. My chest felt too tight. So I just nodded and wiped my eyes, hoping nobody minded. After everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet backyard. The moon was bright overhead, painting silver across the grass. I thought about the old family portrait, the one they'd replaced me in, and realized I no longer cared. Because this was my real life. My real family. No frame could ever contain it. As dawn crept over the rooftops, I carried the welcome home sign to the porch. I mounted it above the door and stepped back to admire it. The wood was smooth under my palm. The letters were simple and perfect. I realized then that Grandma had been right all along. You don't need anyone's permission to belong. You just need the courage to stay. I walked inside, the morning light pouring over the floors I'd scrubbed clean with my own hands. I felt the quiet peace of a life I'd finally claimed. And I knew, without any doubt, that this was exactly where I was meant to be.